Recently I talked about There Are Monsters and I said that it would likely start a series of videos in a similar vein. But before we talk about today's entry, I want to make a weird confession. This film came out 5 years before my birth, so I've had the entirety of my life, if you think about it one way, to watch it. And yet, until early this afternoon, I hadn't. I'd never sat down and watched it in full. Maybe when I was a kid I'd seen bits of it that I've forgotten, but aside from the ending that everyone has seen the scene of, the best facing film ever by Donald Sutherland, and the idea that, pod people is a kind of colloquial term to describe someone who's acting particularly out of character for them, like they've been replaced, that was all of my experience of 1978's Invasion of the Body Snatchers. But I did rectify it earlier today to make notes. So let's talk about this film, which was directed by Philip Kaufman, based on the screenplay by W.D. Richter, itself based on the book The Body Snatchers by Jack Finney, and I guess also the 1956 film of the same name. This stars Donald Sutherland, like I say, Brooke Adams, Leonard Nimoy, Jeff Goldblum, and Veronica Cartwright. And before anyone goes into the comments to say, how could you have not watched this for so long? I get it. I loved it. I sat there for the entire near 2-hour run, just gripped with it. There were a couple of moments that I dipped out because I was making notes and things like that. That will happen. But for the most part, I was just there, like the tension was getting me, everything like that. And whilst There Are Monsters talked about conformity, I did make a discovery while I was looking into some research before recording, and I never made the connection for some reason. Some of you who've been following the channel for a while may remember I did a video about The Faculty around Christmas time because it was released around that time, so I claim it as a Christmas film. But it was also based upon the same source material, which, if you look at it, well, duh. And that was very much about conformity. I even made that connection, but I never drew the connection last time with There Are Monsters. So, arguably, I started this series in a weird way a lot further back than I think I did. But this was very interesting what it did with the material. And whilst those two films do talk about conformity, obviously the 1956 predecessor to this was very much about the Red Menace, like I said before, in the There Are Monsters video. But this lent on that conformity idea, but it was the late 70s conformity, which is very different to the modern sort of late 90s, 2000s version. But we'll get onto that in a moment. I want to talk about some of the amazing sort of work that went in to create this piece, because right from the start we've got expositional moments happening during the titles. It's environmental exposition in a way. We see these, what I can only describe and what I've put in my notes as jizz clouds, because that's really what it made me think of, sort of coming to Earth, and we see that it becomes these plants that then become the thing that starts the process of converting people. But no one tells us this, no one gives us exposition. There isn't this person saying, oh, this thing came down from space and created these plants. We just see it all while the titles are going. While we figure out who was involved in this film, we're also seeing how this started. And I love that. Nowadays, films are too scared to trust the viewer to follow along things like that. And also they put titles in weird places. But this just went, the audience will get it. They can see what's going on. We don't need to spell it out. And no one spells it out. No one says, this thing all came from space in that, over-the-top kind of B-movie dramatic way. And I love it for that. But even cinematography is well done. We see early on of Elizabeth going to her home. And instead of, because San Francisco is full of weird hills and things like that, it's all at a slant as far as I understand. But instead of aligning with the houses, we align with the road, which automatically puts us at a sense of unease right from the start. That is absolutely fascinating to me. That is stellar. The idea that right from the beginning, they're like, no, things are wonky from the get-go, and we're going to show you. Angles are such an important thing in this film. If you've never watched this film from like a sort of film studies, like a media studies angle of looking at how it's shot, watch it again knowing that, and look at all the angles. There are so few straight angles, if you will. And often they're in very sort of dead and boring scenes, well, comparative to everything else. But it's when everything seems kind of okay for a minute, that everything is relatively straight and level. but most of it is shot very kind of wonkily, and it's brilliant. I love it for that. There's even scenes that kind of shift the angles and sort of following the spire at the end and things like that. So much of this film is about how it was shot, as much as what's actually happening on screen and, you know, dialogue, etc. And I love it. We have moments of great attention to detail where Elizabeth's just walking, you know, she's heading off to the Department of Health, and there's a guy running, being chased by something. We don't know what at that point. And also she walks past a door, like a glass door, and there's someone's face right there, creeping right up against it. And it's unsettling. You notice it and you're like, ugh. And there's so many moments of this, of just background things, particularly in the first sort of half an hour, 40 odd minutes. There's so much of this just slowly teasing us the idea that things are wrong here, and they're only getting worse as time goes on. And again, we don't have someone constantly saying, Johnson's acting strange today. Yes, I'm glad you noticed that too. Did you notice that, audience? There's nothing like that, and I love it for that. That's brilliant. I love it. I need more of this. I need Hollywood to go back to what it was doing in the 70s, because damn did they do it right. But there's a couple of great moments of this, of cameos. There's a lot of cameos in this, really, but there's two in particular. The big one being Kevin McCarthy, who played Benel in the original film. And at the end of that film, he's running through the city going, they're coming, and then he faces the screen, if I recall correctly, and says, they're coming, you're next. All that kind of stuff, and it's brilliant. It's that kind of William Castle style moment of incorporating the audience into the scares in a way. But, you know, so we get him here as, you know, a little cameo, and he jumps on the car and he's like, they're coming for you, you know, he's basically reciting what he said at the end of that film, and then he's killed, unfortunately, very shortly afterwards. But it has been said that Kaufman did actually say this is meant to be a kind of nod to that. Not officially acknowledging, but kind of saying this is the same guy. He's been travelling across the country warning people of this impending doom. And I like that. But we also get the director of that earlier film, Don Siegel, as the taxi driver who rats them out later on in the film as well. So they really wanted to keep the threads there, and I do respect it for that. It's acknowledging what came before, what gave it the inspiration. But so much good in here. The actors are great. Leonard Nimoy is amazingly welcoming, and that distinctive one-hand glove thing, which I kind of want. A lot of people have seen this and gone, I want that. So maybe he's done a lot for the half leather glove industry in the last 40 odd years. He's so great in this, and it's weird because I'm so familiar with him as Spock above anything else. That's my big thing of Nimoy. And it's so weird to see him acting with emotion, sort of, in this film, at least until a certain point. And Jeff Goldblum is you could see the Jeff Goldblum that we have now, sort of the seeds of that here. But there's so much great in this. But there's a moment that happens in the film with Kibner, which is why I brought up Leonard Nimoy in particular, which really gives us the theme of the film, which is really what I want to sort of end on, I guess. And that is, like I said before, you know, the other films I've talked about, its conformity and all of that in a very changing world. But this was very much, you know, that point of civil rights being a lot more open. This was like right near that. You know, women were a lot freer. You had the whole people of colour being given more, or technically given what they should have already had, really. But you had all this recognition that, you know, these people are human too, and they should have the same rights as everyone. And it was kind of scaring a lot of older people. This film is arguably not for the people of the age that you think, you know, that your young kids going at the time. It had stuff for them in there, but it was almost more aimed at the generation above. Because Kibner's character talks about the idea that, you know, his role as a psychiatrist is a lot more important now.
People are stepping in and out of relationships too fast because they don't want the responsibility. That's why marriages are going to hell. The whole family unit is shot to hell.
So that was a terrifying thing at this time. People thought that, you know, as people were given more civil rights and things like that, that the world would fall apart, that society would crumble, the family unit being extinct, and you'd just have people doing all sorts with anybody at any time. And we see this in the film. A lot of our main characters are in extramarital situations. and are trying to run away from things that are holding them back. We see it in pretty much all of our main characters. We know that Belichick is a horn dog and things like that, but he has a wife, and he's trying to make his career as a writer rather than helping her out in the spa. He wants to follow his dreams rather than being grounded. We see him shed a tear at one point in the film because of that. This guy, this psychiatrist, can write a book in 6 months, but it takes him 6 months to even get a sentence that he's happy at. And we see it everywhere. Frustrated creatives, we do have that issue, I promise you, where we do have how did you do that in time when I'm not even anywhere near that? And it is frustrating. But we even have the relationship of Elizabeth and Matthew, which Elizabeth's supposed to be with Jeffrey, but there's clearly a relationship happening there. And so all of these people want something outside of what they have. And like I say, the idea that was a terrifying thing for the older generation, but it was also sympathetic. It was like, well, why shouldn't you follow your dreams? This is where it kind of allowed itself to go, okay, that was for the old guys, but for you guys, I understand that. You should be scared of this. You should be a lot more like Matthew and Elizabeth and Nancy, trying to get out of here and escape from this conformity. We understand that. We do. Because we're creatives too. But of course, Hollywood liked status quo, so it had to end in that kind of bleak way, which at the time, a twist like this was very new and very novel. The idea that, in fact, you are going to conform, damn you. You are going to be, we're not going to have the saccharine ending. It was great for the time. Now we're used to it. Every other film seems to have a twist or some darker ending. It's why I love The Mist with Thomas Jane. But yeah, this is very much a product of its time. And again, like I've said, with The Faculty and with There Are Monsters, the pressure to conform throughout the last 40 odd years has been a terror that we've had to really come to grips with. But there's another kind of conformity that a lot of people are railing against, particularly these days, and I think it's why I really want to do the next thing I'm going to do, next. And that is They Live. I really want to talk about that because capitalism is, to some, the worst kind. And I think the idea of just be happy and consume and just go along with everything, just be docile little sheep for us, is terrifying. So hope you'll join me next time for really another classic from yesteryear. But thank you very much for letting me talk about 1978's Invasion of the Body Snatchers that I finally got around to watching. Thank you very much for that, and until next time, as always, take care.